بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so he says ومنهم يحيى بن سعيد القطان. أبو سعيد خليفة شعبة والقائم بعده مقامه في هذا العلم، وعنه تلقاه أئمة هذا الشأن كأحمد وعلي ويحيى. وش يحيى؟ أو يحيى بن معين، عفوا. ويحيى بن معين ونحوهم and the likes of them. وقال قد كان شعبة يحكمه على نفسه في هذا العلم. Right? You say, what do you think about me? Did I make a mistake, etc. Okay, so Sheikh Dr. Ahmed Snowbird, he mentions this in his book من محمد إلى البخاري صلى الله عليه وسلم. He says that, basically of the objectivity of this system is that it can be used by the founders of this system on themselves. So we mentioned last week that basically the founder of hadith science, right? So so a chain of transmission is a natural trail, right? It's not something that you create. You didn't create a science. It's not a science. That's just an accident of you speaking, right? So, um, that's so. But naqt al-rijal, and right, this whole thing, and naqt al-asanid, this is a science. So basically, Shu'ba is basically the founder of the science, right? He's basically the founder of the science. Um, um, in a practical sense, and he is Iraqi, right? And his problems are usually Iraqi, and his problems are often Iraqi, right? And he is Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, also Iraqi, right? Um, and and he's following on from it, right? So he says, وكان شعبة يحكمه على نفسه في هذا العلم. ذكر ابن أبي حاتم عن أبيه عن رستة الأصبهاني قال سمعت ابن مهدي يقول اختلفوا يوما عند شعبة فقالوا اجعل بيننا وبينك حكما. حكم on the pattern فعل meaning مفعول, like ولد meaning the مولود, the صمد meaning the مسمود إليه. um, I can't think of another example, but so المحكم بين الاثنين هو الحكم, right? فقال لقد رضيت بالأحول, يعني يحيى بن سعيد القطان, right? He was cross-eyed. فجاء يحيى فتحاكموا إليه فقضى على شعبة, right? فقال له شعبة ومن يطيق نقدك يا أحول, أو من له مثل نقدك. So he is بصرا من كبار من كبار التاسعة. So when he's passing away 198. Excuse me. So 100 سنة 198. So he's passing away 10 years after Imam Abu Hanifa. One was Shu'bah. We did Shu'bah last week, like last year, didn't we? We did last. So
Yesterday we covered Shurba and the last. We went through him.
where was he? So okay, he was, right? He was there. That was Malik. We did Malik. Oh, Sufyan came before. Okay, yeah. So Shu'bah came before Sufyan. Here's Shu'bah. So he said, when did he pass away then? Right. هو أول من وسع الكلام في الجرح والتعديل واتصال الأسانيد وانقطاعها. Right. So here is تبع meaning تابع, like salaf meaning salif, and khalaf meaning khalif. Right. He passed away in سنة 60 ومئة, 160. Right. So if you could imagine, he is almost the beginning of hadith, almost. Right. So compare this to, so he passes in 160. Okay. Imam Abu Hanifa passed away in 150. And Imam Abu Hanifa is not the beginning of fiqh, right? Imam Abu Hanifa is like the middle of fiqh. Does that make sense, right? If you think about the Imams, right? The Imams are like the development when you get to the stage of an Imam. Imam Malik is the first stage is the fiqh, nebulous fiqh of Medina, and then you get the fiqh of the Imam, and then you get the tahrir and the tawsi' of that Imam, right? And naqd of the Imam, etc., right? But basically, when you have an Imam like Imam Shafi or Imam, that's a stage that is beyond that, right? Even if you think about anything else, blues, think about music, right? Elvis Presley is not the beginning of rock and roll, right? It has to exist for a star to cut to for so the thing to come out, right? So so, but there are certain people like Ibrahim an-Nakhai, um, like Masruq, these people who are like like very kind of very key people, or the key Sahaba who are very good at fiqh, right? So fiqh starts early, but it reaches a certain stage, right? Some level of maturity, a level of maturity with the Imams. So Imam Abu Hanifa to Imam Shafi to Imam Ahmad, that span of 100, years or so. And right, and then its super maturity is by the 5th to 8th century, right? The super maturity of, or the ultimate maturity of fiqh. But it's already at a mature stage. It's not fully mature, but a mature stage by the 2nd century, beginning of the 2nd century, right? Whereas hadith is not at a mature stage by that time, right? It's a mature stage by the 3rd century, and super refinement 7th century. Okay, so you can see it's later, right? Hadith developed after fiqh. That's a key concept to come again, right? So if notice how the simple argument of the Salafi is, well, look, where the 6 books came after the Imam, so therefore their research can't have been thorough, right? You can actually flip it on them, right? The Imams came before the 6 books, and fiqh, therefore we can't, it's something it's a system that's actually bigger than the 6 books. Fiqh is bigger than the 6 books and is wider than the 6 books. It's not limited to the 6 books or something like that, right? So yeah, so that's useful to see those dates, right? When are things happening? Qira'at, right? So qira'at, the imams of the qira'at. And then, so qira'ah, so Asim ibn Abi Najud is he is later than Imam Abu Hanifa, I believe. Right? Nafi'. Not sure when he is, but I think he's again later as well. Either he might be at the same time, or might be later. Al-Kisa'i is later as well, I think. Kisa'i is the same time as Imam Muhammad, if I remember correctly. Right. So fiqh is earlier than tajweed, if that makes sense. Like super refinement of tajweed. It's earlier than that. Right. Fiqh in Arabic are one of the earliest things to develop. And fiqh definitely comes before hadith. So you come along and say, I remember somebody smirkingly said this, may Allah protect us and guide us. They said, I don't think Imam Abu Hanifa knew much about, Jarh Ta'dil, right? The answer is he probably wouldn't care, right? Because like it's like it's like saying, I don't think Imam Shafi knew much about socioeconomics. He doesn't really care about socioeconomics, right? Or he doesn't know much about modern psychology. He doesn't really care about it, right? So the issue is that it's not the Hanafi school does not have to answer to a particular paradigm of hadith that developed after it, or Imam Malik or anybody else, right? It doesn't have to. It's not obliged to answer to it. So what happened over time is the Shafi'is monopolized hadith. So then everybody had to explain why they use a mursal hadith, or explain why they did use a weak hadith, or explain this, explain that. Whereas, that's fine. I mean, that's just how it worked out, you know. But so it became the standard that everybody has to answer. But that's not a real thing, right? The system is already there. So it's important to understand that, right? Okay. Does that make sense, Safar and Abba? So Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan is to Shu'bah what Imam Muhammad is to Imam Abu Hanifa, right? Or you could put it another way. You could say, like so Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan is to Shu'bah what Ibrahim al-Nakha'i was to Abdullah Mas'ud. He didn't study with Abdullah Mas'ud, so there's a slight difference there. But, you know, so we see hadith, we see Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan as this marji'. It's not like, so we're going to see things through the eyes of Imam Ahmad, Ali al-Madini, Yahya ibn Ma'in, etc. And those after one, Nasa'i, Bukhari, etc. Right? Um, so he's kind of like, he's a few stages back. Okay. fine. وقال ابن معين قال لي عبد الرحمن بن مهدي لا ترى بعينيك مثل يحيى بن سعيد القطان أبدا. قال الإمام أحمد ما رأينا مثل يحيى بن سعيد في هذا الشأن، يعني في مع الحديث وروايته. هو كان صاحب هذا الشأن، وجعل يرفع أمره جدا. قال أحمد أيضا لم يكن في زمان يحيى بن قطان مثله، كان تعلم من شعبة. سئل أحمد عن يحيى و- و- وابن مهدي ووكيع، فقال كان يحيى أبصارهم بالرجال وأنقاهم حديثا، وأظنه قال وأثبتهم حديثا. قال أيضا لا يقاس بيحيى بن سعيد في العلم أحد. He's on another level. قال أيضا يحيى بن سعيد إليه المنتهى في التثبت بالبصرة. قال أيضا ما رأيت في الحديث ما رأيت في الحديث أثبت منه. قال سهل بن صالح سألت أحمد بن حنبل. Presumably this is the grandson. Not sure. This is Sahal ibn Salih ibn Ahmed perhaps. فقلت يحيى بن قطان وابن مبارك إذا اختلفا في حديث فقول من تقدم قال ليس نقدم نحن على يحيى أحدا. قال أبو حاتم الرازي إذا اختلف ابن مبارك ويحيى بن سعيد وسفيان بن عيينة في حديث آخذ بقول يحيى. قال ابن المديني. Right. So here, this quote, what does it tell us? It tells us that the giants make mistakes, of course. So what's the, a Sahih hadith, doesn't matter who narrates it, is always dhanni. Right? قال ابن المديني ما رأيت أحدا أنفع للإسلام وأهله من يحيى بن سعيد القطان. قال علي سمعت علي سمعت يحيى بن سعيد يقول ينبغي لصاحب الحديث أن يكون ثبت الأخذ وأن يكون يفهم ما يقال له ويبصر الرجال ويتعاهد ذاك. Right, be careful of that. قال البخاري أعلم الناس بالثوري يحيى بن سعيد لأنه عرف صحيح حديثه من تدليسه. قال أبو علي الحافظ. Right, this is not حدثنا أبو بكر الواسطي قال سمعت علي بن المديني يقول شعبة أحفظ الناس للمشايخ. شيخ مشايخ وذياء. وسفيان أحفظ الناس للأبواب وابن مهدي أحفظهم قال للمشايخ والأبواب. ويحيى بن سعيد أعرف بمخارج الأسانيد وأعرف بمواضع الطعن من جميعهم. So in terms of the science of hadith criticism, he's more knowledgeable. قال يحيى بن غيلان سمعت يحيى بن سعيد يقول ما تركت حديث محمد بن إسحاق إلا لله. قال أبو بكر بن الخلاد دخلت على يحيى بن سعيد في مرضه فقال لي يا أبا بكر ما ما تركت أهل البصرة يتكلمون. قلت يذكرون خيرا إلا أنهم يخافون عليك من كلامك في الناس. فقال احفظ عني لأن يكون خصمي في الآخرة رجل من عرض الناس أحب إلي من أن يكون خصمي في الآخرة النبي صلى الله عليه أن يكون خصمي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول بلغك عني حديث وقع في وهمك أنه عنا غير صحيح يعني فلم تنكر. Right? So I would prefer that people have a case against me for criticizing them and saying you made a mistake and you whatever, than the Prophet ﷺ saying your hadith reached you that you thought was wrong and you didn't correct it. Okay. What's the word he says here? رجل من عرض الناس. I think here means normal people. Allahu a'lam. Of the breadth of people, the average Joe. Basically, I would prefer to be من عرض. That's what it seems. The average Joe. That's what it means. عرض الناس. والله أعلم. عرض الحائط is the side of. عرض الحائط is the width the length of the wall. How wide is the wall? عرض الحائط. عرض الحائط against the wall. Right? اضرب به عرض الحائط. Throw it against the wall. Allahu a'lam. And then he mentions here. So this is here قال ابن حاتم. He mentions a chain transmission, and this is in the Ilal of Ali al-Madini. Okay, and this is very important, right? This is in the beginning of Ilal. It's printed and everything. فنظرت فإذا الإسناد يدور على ستة: الزهري وعمرو بن دينار وقتادة ويحيى بن عبد الكثير وأبا إسحاق يعني الهمداني وسليمان الأعمش. ثم صار علم هؤلاء الستة إلى أصحاب الأصناف، فمنهم من صنف من أهل الحجاز مالك وابن جريج ومحمد بن إسحاق وسفيان، ومن أهل البصرة إلى آخره. So a very important thing, okay, a very important thing, and it is tricky, and I've mentioned this before, is that there isn't good pedagogy in hadith. This book is not good pedagogy, right? The Muqaddimah al-Salah is also not good pedagogy, that's for sure. Um, 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 what's it called? نخبة الفكر also it's not, right? So basically it's kind of like there's this huge disconnect between what you do in hadith in terms of takhrij or in terms of just being familiar with hadith and what you study. Like there's a huge disconnect, right? Obviously that's the case with anything, but you know it's pretty big, right? So why is that the case? Because if we look at the traditional curricula, right, hadith was never part of a traditional curriculum, right? I don't know really when you can say the beginning of the curriculum, but let's say with Imam Ghazali, right, the Nizamiya, right? There's certain traditional curricula, and so fiqh, nahu, kalam, there is good curricula, good textbooks. You do the textbook, you understand what's going on, right? But with hadith, it's not like that. Hadith, you're just kind of, it's like learning how to become a street fighter, right? It's just very, very difficult. So one of the key things that we have to do, and some of it is easy, some of it is hard, is actually doing bite-sized pieces. So when you pick up the 6 books, you're not doing a bite-sized piece at all. You're learning multiple things. So what we need to do as hadith students is, for example, the Muwatta of Imam Malik. The Muwatta of Imam Malik is a very, very important book for a number of reasons. From a hadith point of view, it just gives me a good idea of the hadith of Malik. So you've just said there's 6 people who are like really important, right? Now there's other lists as well you can put there, right? Malik ibn Anas. Okay, so I need to focus on Malik ibn Anas and just focus on his asanid, on his hadiths, okay, until I've got them. Then I go to Ibn Jurayj. Then I go to Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Then I go to Sufyan ibn Uyayna. So here's the issue. Had you been of that time, you would have that picture. Okay? So, or if you're at least the author of the 6 books, so imagine your Bukhari yourself. With your Bukhari yourself, you see these people who are traveling the world or traveled the world, and they study with Malik, and you're going to go and get the hadith of Malik. Right? Then Imam Bukhari and the author of the six books, they learnt their lesson and they organize things in terms of topic. Okay, they organize things in terms of topic. But they already have the asanid in their mind. They already have the musnad in their mind, right? This is like you teaching comparative law at Yale after having done 40 years of fiqh, right? Plus 10 years of um, New York business law, right? So you already have the mutun and the simple paradigms in your head, and now you're doing very advanced things. So when you're reading Sunnah Abu Dawood, it's actually very difficult because you don't see A'mash from so and so. So what you need is I need A'mash, like I need to sit in A'mash seat and like who is A'mash listening to? Where does so there are 2 books that kind of do this, right? Which are the Muwatta of Imam Malik, right? Which basically does that. So that's why the Muwatta is such an important book. It is the most important book to study, right? Um, and then the Musnad al-Humaydi. Okay, so let's as an example of that, right? The first hadith in Sahih Bukhari, إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Imam Bukhari from Al-Humaydi from Sufyan ibn Uyayna with his chain. Okay? So Imam Bukhari, he is already familiar with the asanid of Sufyan ibn Uyayna. We're not. And you're not going to see it again and again. You can do Bukhari 5 times, but you won't see it in that way. Whereas if you do the Musnad of Humaydi, the Musnad of Humaydi, you're going to see Humaydi, basically, he's the Aqran of Imam Shafi'i. He was basically the Rawiyah, with the term marbuta, the Rawiyah of Sufyan ibn Uyayna. So like 80% or 90% of the book is just Sufyan ibn Uyayna's book, is hadiths. So you are just seeing, you're seeing what is Sufyan ibn Uyayna's hadiths. Okay, now I want the Jami' of Sufyan al-Thawri. Oh, whoops, I don't have it. I don't have it. So now I'm going to see Sufyan al-Thawri again and again and again in 6 books, but I'm not really familiar with who he studies with. Because I'm just kind of confused. And they don't come along and teach you in Matan 1, Matan 2 of Hadith. They don't do that because there isn't good pedagogy in Hadith, right? And I'm not a specialist in Hadith. That there is something, and I've heard like people say there is something not off, but like slightly off anyway with the late Hadith scholars. And I've seen certain things, differences between Imam al-Dhahabi and Imam Ibn Hajar. With Ibn Hajar and Ibn Salah before him, there's a lot of systems and taqsimat that are not really reflective of what we're doing, right? It's not really reflective of what this thing is, right? Um, Whereas the Muqidha of Imam Dhahabi has certain things in it which really change pictures. For example, the definition of al-hadith al-aziz. When was the last time you ever had to deal with al-hadith al-aziz? That is useful in the taqsimat. How will the logical breakdown, what is the science? Give me a logical breakdown of the science. But it's not really useful in reality at all. Whereas being familiar with the key people that narrate from that Sufyan Thawri narrates from. Who were these people? What were they like? What were their hadiths? This is like part of your, introduction to hadith, right? So that's why again the Muwatta does give you that. It does give you that because you do see. So if you had so I believe there's a narration of Ibn Qasim's. There's a kind of a narration of Ibn Qasim's riwayah of the Muwatta, which puts the hadith of Imam Malik in a different order, right? But if you can imagine, the best thing to do is like basically having a musnad version or an upside down musnad version of the Muwatta. Meaning, I want the hadith that Imam Malik narrate from Nafi'. I want the hadith that Imam Malik narrates from his shaykh. So you're seeing Imam Malik and his shuyukh and up. So you have a branching off from the narrator to the one who's narrating from. So you see the map, but you basically see the maps and structures that come to Malik. Okay? And thereafter, once you've got that, you're going to have the ones that come off it. So then you can do things like Daraqutni did, where he goes through the hadiths that are narrated from Malik and sees mistakes that either Malik made or other people made from Malik, right? But you can't do that if you don't have these chains in front of you and you're not familiar with these chains. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a theory, right? So these things, the hadith of Ibn Jurayj, I have a book somewhere, a selection of hadiths of Ibn Jurayj. But basically what you need to do is go through the 6 books, find the hadith of Ibn Jurayj. And then here's the problem. The 6 books don't have athar. So actually, the picture of what I'm getting from Ibn Jurayj is not complete. So what I'm trying to say is we don't have good pedagogy because what we are consuming as students is either too processed or processed in a way that's not giving you what you need. So what happens then is the only way to get good at hadith is basically doing your own homework, right? like working out yourself, basically. Just doing all this stuff, which obviously is a way that you learn, right? That is a way that you learn. I would say with my fiqh, half of my fiqh is with teachers, half of my fiqh by myself. And there's big things I learned by myself, and certain things that my teachers told me I couldn't even understand, right? Like they tell me something, I don't even understand what you're saying until later on because I just can't. You can like this kind of realizations, etc. But with hadith, it's almost entirely like that, and that is partly because of nature, partly because of the curricula. They aren't good curricula, right? We, and things are kind of organized in a certain way. So again, I mentioned this many times. You go and do Nukhbat al-Fikr and Muqaddam al-Salah with Sheikh Muhammad Awama, you will not know anything. So that's you're studying the most important textbooks in hadith. With the great scholar, you won't know anything. Why? Because that's just not how the science works. A, right? The nature of the science. B, these curricula are not really useful for what we're doing because you need to know Malik from who Malik knows from these people. And so again, why do you have to know the athar as well? Because you're like, I know that's not a hadith because that's an athar, right? So in order to know how, you need to know the whole picture. How has Ibn Jurayj received the past of Islam? Okay, these are the fatawas that he's heard from his sheikh. Here's this from his sheikh, from his teacher. He's from this person. Here's this hadith. Here's these things, and then you see that, right? So you basically have the Muwatta of Ibn Jurayj and the Muwatta of Muhammad ibn Ishaq and the Muwatta of Sufyan ibn Uyayna, right? And these things basically don't exist, right? To some extent, right? Um, and then here, similarly, same thing with Shu'bah, same thing with Sa'id ibn Abi Aruba, right? Um, Same thing with Hamad ibn Salama, same thing with Hamad ibn Zayd, same thing with etc. Right? Sufyan al-Thawri, al-Awza'i, right? Um, So, it's an important thing that we do. And so again, you can just crack these things up, right, without a system, I guess, right? Like swimming. Like how to learn how to swim. Oh, I didn't have a swimming teacher to learn how to swim, right? So it's possible you can crack these things just by yourself, just through a lot of your own efforts, right? But but having a good curriculum, and that's why the Muwatta is so important because it's a key thing. Muwatta contains so many key concepts about everything. The naqa of the hadith, right? The hadith are not ma'lula. The short asanid, which is very important in learning. You have to have short asanid. It's too difficult to see long names, right? Short asanid. The fact that the amal, the how important the amal is. Um, the key athar, etc. There's so many things that are in it. It's a very, very important book, right? But we don't have that for Ibn Jurayj. We don't have that for Muhammad Ishaq and Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Sufyan al-Thawri, right? Hamad ibn Salama, we don't have that, right? It's Allah. So then he goes through here. So he says, وَمَنْ صَلَّفَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْحِجَازِ مَالِكُ بْنُ أَنَسٍ وَابْنُ جُرَيْجٍ وَمُحَمَّدٍ إِسَانٍ ومن أهل البصرة etc. I'm just going to read the thing here. ومن أهل واسط هشيم الدستوائي ثم صار علم هؤلاء 12 الاثني عشر إلى 6 إلى يحيى بن سعيد القطان وعبد الرحمن بن مهدي ووكيع بن جراح ويحيى بن زائدة ويحيى بن آدم وعبد الله مبارك انتهى. Right, and then it goes on to the next generation, next generation. So they say that with Imam Bukhari, he began with memorizing the books of Abdullah Mubarak, right? We don't have that. So we have the zubda, the upshot of what Imam Bukhari got, but we didn't learn it as he learned it. So it's actually kind of difficult. That makes sense. Because like you read Bukhari, it's like, I can't really deal with this. It's because I'm not dealing with the bite-sized pieces that you had, right? So again, the Muwatta in reality is only about 500 hadith, right? Okay, if you take out the athar, the mawqufat and maqtu'at, it's about 500 hadith, right? So that's a mitten, right? Something you can actually consume, actually learn. Um, okay, so then he says, ومنهم عبد الرحمن بن مهدي البصري قرين يحيى بن سعيد ويكنى أبا سعيد. قال حسين بن عروة: كنت عند حماد بن زيد وعنده عبد الرحمن بن مهدي. قال حماد: إن كان أحد يؤتى لهذا الشأن فهو هذا الشاب. If anybody deserves to be studied from, this young man here. قال جرير الرازي: ما رأيت مثل عبد الرحمن بن مهدي. ووصف عنه بصرا بالحديث وحفظا. ووصف عنه بصرا بالحديث وحفظا. Not familiar with that phrase. بصر عنه. Described of him a great insight into hadith and memorization. Allahu A'lam. قال ابن مديني: كان ابن مهدي أعلم الناس. قالها مرارا. وفي رواية عنه قال: أعلم الناس بالحديث عبد الرحمن بن مهدي. قال أيضا: أعلم الناس بزيد بن ثابت وقوله 10 وسماهم أولهم سعيد مسيب. Right, so this is وقوله. Right, so who knows the fiqh of Zayd ibn Thabit the best? Sa'id Musayyib. قال: وكان أعلم الناس بقولهم وحديثهم ابن شهاب. ثم بعده مالك. ثم بعد مالك عبد الرحمن بن مهدي. So he was Madani. He was إلى madhab. So if you read the beginning of Ali Madini, he mentions that he's following their madhab, the madhab of Medina. قال أبو حاتم: حدثنا محمد بن صفوان قال: سمعت ابن المديني يقول: لو أخذت ف... فأحلفت. Right? فأحلفت. I was made to swear بين الركن والمقام لحلفت بالله أني لم أرى أحدا قط أعلم بالحديث من عبد الرحمن بن مهدي. قال صالح بن أحمد بن حنبل: قلت لأبي: أيما أثبت عندك، عبد الرحمن بن مهدي أو وكيع؟ قال عبد الرحمن أقل سقطا من وكيع في سفيان. قد خالفه وكيع في 60 حديثا من حديث سفيان، وكان عبد الرحمن يجيء بها على ألفاظها، وكان لعبد الرحمن توق حسن. توق was careful. قال محمد بن أبي بكر المقدمي: ما رأيت أحدا أتقن لما سمع ولما لم يسمع من عبد الرحمن بن مهدي. قال أبو حاتم الرازي: عبد الرحمن بن مهدي أثبت من يحيى بن سعيد وأتقن من وكيع، وكان عرض حديثه على سفيان الثوري. قال الإمام أحمد أيضا في ابن مهدي رحمه الله: ما كان أشد. So the كان is زائدة here. Right. ما كان أشد تتبعه, meaning ما أشد تتبعه. Right. This كان زائدة that comes in. It comes in between. ما كان. You say ما أجله. Wow, how amazing he was. ما أتقنه للحديث. ما كان أتقنه. This is ما كان زائدة. ما كان أشد تتبعه للألفاظ وأشد توقيه. How careful he was. قال: وكان حافظا وكان يتوقى كثيرا. كان يحب أن يحدث باللفظ. قال: هو إمام من أمة المسلمين. قال: لم يكن بكثير حديث جدا، وكان الغالب عليه حديث كان الغالب عليه حديث سفيان. قال: وكان يتوسع في الفقه. كان فيه أوسع من يحيى، وكان يحيى يميل إلى قول الكوفيين، وكان عبد الرحمن يذهب إلى بعض مذاهب الحديث وإلى رأي المدنيين. حنبلي مالكي. So this is one of the key things as well that I quote, and it's a totally different topic, is the madhab of the Salaf. The Salaf didn't have a madhab. That's not true. They had a madhab. Right? كان يحيى يميل إلى قول الكوفيين. So there was a Kufi madhab, right? The four madhabs did not just come out ex nihilo. There's a Kufi madhab and there's a Medina madhab. And we see that in the beginning of Ali al-Madini and other places. In the Ilal of Ali al-Madini and other places. ونقل ذلك كله الأثرم عن إمام أحمد. قال أبو حاتم الرازي سئل أحمد عن يحيى وعبد الرحمن وكيم فقال كان عبد الرحمن كان أكثرهم حديثا. وروى الحافظ ابن نعيم بإسناده عن قواريري القواريري قال كان ابن مهدي يعرف حديثه وحديث غيره وكان يحيى بن سعيد يعرف حديثه. وعن حماد بن زيد قال لئن عاش ابن مهدي ليخرجن رجل أهل البصرة. He'll come out as the main man of people Basra. If he lives long, he'll be the main man of Ahl Basra. وعن حماد أنه سئل عن مسألة فقال من لهذا إلا ابن مهدي فأقبل عبد الرحمن فسألوه عن ذلك فأجاب فلما قام من عنده قال هذا سيد أو فتى البصرة منذ 30 سنة أو نحو هذا. وعن القواريري قال أملى علي عبد الرحمن بن مهدي 20,000 حديثا حفظا. 20,000 حديث حفظا. Right? So does it mean hadith or does it mean quotes? Right? So مرفوعة مقطوعة, right? موقوفة. وعن أحمد بن حنبل قال كأن عبد الرحمن بن مهدي خلق للحديث. وعن مهنا سألت أحمد أيما أفقه عبد الرحمن أم يحيى قال عبد الرحمن. Also we have to understand that Imam Ahmed is also أميل إلى المدينيين, right? He's not Kufi. So Sufyan is Kufi. Imam Abu Hanifa is Kufi. Imam Ahmed is not Kufi in his fiqh, right? So I don't know exactly what was happening in Baghdad fiqh-wise, but Imam Ahmed is very much an extension of the Maliki school, the Medinan school, right? It's that world. وعن ابن المديني قال كان علم عبد الرحمن بن في الحديث كالسحر. قال نعيم بن حماد قلت لابن مهدي كيف. So here's an example, right? Many people they get very upset when he gives some examples like stuff that they're oversensitive, right? So sihr is haram, it's kufr according to some people, right? But you might use an example and say, man, right? It's not. I'm trying to say. We understand what I'm trying to say. He's not trying to say that it was bad. So many people they're kind of oversensitive, like because the thing is haram, everything the example is haram. That's not what I mean about it, right? Like Zafar, how old are you?
49.
Say it again.
49.
49. Okay, so you're older than me, right? So I don't know if you grew up saying sick. Was that a word that they used? That's
No, I didn't.
all right. So I grew up using that word, right? I grew up with saying, that was sick, right? That's a phrase that I used. Okay, so I'm 10 years younger than you. So what does that mean when you say, oh, that was sick? Like it doesn't mean that it was bad. It means it's really good. So the tashbih, the isti'ara is just as sickness is an extreme feeling, right? It's a negative and extreme feeling. This thing is extreme. So you're just taking the shidda, the extremity of something. You're not saying anything else, right? So, maybe the khutbah was sick, right? Should you say that? I mean, maybe you shouldn't, right? But here they're using something like that, right? He's saying it's like sihr. What you're trying to say it was bad, right? You're trying to say that it was almost magical. قال نعيم بن محمد قلت لابن مهدي كيف تعرف صحيح الحديث وسقيمه قال كما يعرف الطبيب المجنون. وعن ابن نمير قال قال ابن مهدي معرفة الحديث إلهام. So again, the book Tamyiz by Imam Muslim that we read, it was explaining this ilham, right? It's not actually ilham. It's not, oh, I just got a hunch, you know. Fiqh is a bit more like that. Fiqh can be because you're actually being at least you're being creative. You're being creative and you're seeing exceptions to rules that are kind of somewhat subtle, right? Very subtle actually. But hadith, right? It is exactly Sherlock Holmes, right? There is an actual reason, right? This has to be a mistake because of this, and this. قالوا ابن نمير صدق. I think صدق. I can't read it. لو قلت له من أين لم يكن له جواب. Right? Meaning it would be hard to express exactly why that's the case. Right? قال ابن مهدي لا يجوز أن يكون الرجل إماما حتى يعلم ما يصح مما لا يصح وحتى لا يحتج بكل شيء وحتى يعلم مخارج العلم, where does, right, sources where things come from. Right, so this is again the issue with the faqih not knowing hadith fiqh. Right, so there's a difference in the faqih knowing how you work and not really caring about your system. I don't really care about your system, no big deal. As opposed to Habibi, you are a faqih, right? You are a faqih and you don't even know how you're navigating the information. You don't know how to weigh up the information you're looking at, right? It's just all over the place. So you look at all information as the same, but it's not, right? So you're not even, so that's a problem. You don't know the disparity of knowledge is important. I'm not saying, so when you say sahih and da'if, it's, so, it's like the muhaddith is like again, the tashbih is that is not intended. It's like a sniffer dog, right? It's like you smell curry, he smells Bengali curry 2 days old with a scent of alcohol and blood. It's a different picture. So your picture is not that it's not very clear, whereas his picture is clearer, right? So it's not the issue of rejecting everything, but at least clarity. I'm not saying don't use a weak hadith, but know what the weak hadith is, right? If this is what I'm looking at, you know what you're looking at, you know the weight of what you're looking at. This is a fatwa of a sahabi, not the words of the Prophet. Okay, I know that. Or it's possibly this or possibly that, knowing the world that you're looking at. Okay, قال مهدي لأن أعرف علة حديث واحد أحب إلي من أن أستفيد 10 أحاديث. وعنه قال لا يكون إمام في الحديث من يحدث بكل ما سمع ولا يكون إمام في العلم من يحدث عن كل أحد ولا يكون إمام في العلم من يحدث بالشاذ من العلم والحفظ والحفظ والإتقان. Right? So this whole thing as a shadh min al-ilm, this is something very different as well. So again, one of the reasons why the Meccan school of fiqh died out is kathrat al-shududh, right? That there was, after generation, this kept being fatwa that other people just rejected. So then they start having strange opinions. And so as Imam Ahmad mentions in his, as Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali mentions in his book, الرد على من لم what's it called? الرد على من لم يتبع مذاهب الأربع, or can't remember what it's called, من لم يلتزم المذاهب الأربع. He gives a story. So this happened, right? Is that there's a valid position that existed, but by a certain stage, it was like that's such a weird thing. And when this I can't remember who it was, one of the Meccan scholars turns up in Basra, they wanted to beat him up. And they're like, "What are you doing with this fatwa?" Right? And so there's actually limitations to pluralism. Right? There's limitations to how pluralistic you can be. And there's certain fatwas like, yeah, don't share that with everybody. Right? So لا يكون إمام في العلم من يحدث بالشاذ من العلم. Right? Gotta be very careful of who you say, what to say, particularly in our time. Right? And when you say one thing, it's going to go everywhere. Right? Okay, ومنهم وكيع بن جراح ابن مليح بن عدي بن فرس أبو سفيان الرؤاسي الكوفي أحد الأئمة الأعلام. قال أحمد ما رأيت أحدا أوعى للعلم من وكيع ولا أشبه بأهل النسك عفوا. قال أيضا وكان وكيع حافظا وكان أحفظ من ابن مهدي كثيرا. قال أيضا وما رأيت أحدا مما أدركنا كان أحفظ للحديث من وكيع. قال أيضا كان وكيع يحفظ عن سفيان وعن مشايخ فلم يكن يصحف. He didn't make mistakes. قال أيضا ما رأيت أحدا كان أجمع من وكيع. وقال ما كتبت عن أحد أكثر مما كتبت عنه. قال إسحاق بن راهويه حفظي وحفظ المبارك تكلف وحفظ وكيع أصلي. قام وكيع يوما قائما فوضع يده على الحائط وحدث ب700 حديث. So we have to work hard. It's just for him it's normal. قال بشر بن السري قال وسهل بن عثمان ويحيى بن معين ما رأينا أحفظ من وكيع. قال إبراهيم بن شماس وكيع أحفظ الناس. سئل أحمد عن يحيى وابن مهدي ووكيع فقال كان وكيع أسردهم. It's quoted like that. قال أبو حاتم وكيع أحفظ من ابن المبارك. قال يحيى بن اليماني إن لهذا الحديث رجالا خلقهم الله منذ يوم خلق السماوات والأرض وإن وكيعا منهم. قال حماد بن زيد ليس الثوري عندنا بأفضل من وكيع. سئل عبد الرحمن من أثبت في الأعمش بعد الثوري قال ما أعدل بوكيع أحدا. I do not equivalate. I do not. What's the phrase? I don't equivalate. No, what's the verb? I don't. I don't deem equal. What's the verb I'm looking for? I don't. I don't equivalate. No. I don't equate. That's not the word, is it? I don't.
You could use equate theory, which means to.
Yeah. Would you use that? I equate. I equate to equate x to y to equate x to y. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what's being conveyed here.
Equate x to y is the state to treat them as the same thing. It is, yeah. I do equate x to y. There we go. Can't speak English anymore. Alhamdulillah. قال له رجل يقولون أبو معاوية فنفر من ذلك فقال معاوية عنده كذا وكذا وهما. So he makes mistakes. قال معين وكيع أحب إلي في سفيان من عبد الرحمن مهدي فذكر ذلك لأبي حاتم وقيل أيما أحب إليك فقال عبد الرحمن ثبت ووكيع ثقة. What's the difference? Right, interesting. وظاهر هذا أنه قدم عبد الرحمن على وكيع والله أعلم. قال ابن معين ما رأيت أحفظ من وكيع. قال أيضا من فضل عبد الرحمن بن مهدي على وكيع لعنه يحيى. الله أكبر. pretty hardcore. وعن عبد الرزاق قال ما رأيت الثورية وابن عيينة ومعمرا ومالكا ورأيت فما رأت عيناي قط مثل وكيع. قال محمد بن عبد الله بن نمير وكيع أعلم بالحديث من ابن إدريس. وكانوا إذا رأوا وكيعا سكتوا يعني للحفظ والإجلال. فهذا ما أشار إليه الترمذي من تراجم بعض أعيان إما الحفاظ المقتدى بهم في هذا الحديث وقد ذكر أنه ذكره على وجه الاختصار ليستدل به على منازلهم وتفاوت مراتهم في الحفظ. And he continues. Inshallah, we'll continue inshallah here next week. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Did my point about what's the phrase? Pedagogy, does it make sense, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Right. So if you compare yourself, right? So I get Aban and I say, here you go. Read this tafsir. And he's like, and then I say, like, do you understand the Nahu discussion? I say, yes, I've studied Nahu. There is good textbooks in Nahu. I understand what they're saying, right? It's not that amazing to get to that level. You say, here we go. Is a discussion of fiqh. Like, if you've studied a few books in fiqh, right, cover to cover of all the abwab, you get what's going on. You can navigate. You are educated. Being educated in hadith is very hard. It's actually very hard. So I can just pick up Abu Dawood and just like get a sense of what's going on. It's very difficult. I mean, you could explain it with a sharh, you can do it, but it's not really, you know, it's not that you don't feel comfortable. It's very difficult to feel comfortable, like, yeah, just pick up this book and I'm comfortable with the names and these kind of people. Right? I'm not talking about all the names, but it's saying you look at it and there's like a familiarity. This takes a lot of work to get there. Right? And then arguably then the book is actually closed for most people. Right? The book is closed. That's not the case with fiqh. Fiqh is also our creation, so it's slightly different, right? Like we created the science. So it's concepts, human concepts that we created, as opposed to, you know, names and places and things are slightly different. So you know, there is a difference in that. Kalam, same kind of thing, but you know, it's hard. And this is the point as well that you know Suyuti made about the ma'qulat, right? So the ma'qulat are actually very easy. Right? So if you're talking about like place names and history and animals and words, there's nothing aqli about it, right? It's just you need to know it. So do you understand this line of poetry? No, I don't. Okay, well, you don't know things, then do you? Right? Do you understand? Do you know this narrator? No. Do you know what? I don't know. You know, so it's a lot of hard work, right? So you know, this is my own you know, my own opinion, and you know, forgive me for expressing my own opinion, but like I often find that with fiqh, like fiqh, you can kind of guess it half the time. I mean, the point is a human being worked it out, right? And so it's kind of cheap in that way. Things like it's somewhat easy. Kalam is like, yeah, okay. Nahwa is like, yeah, okay. You know, you got it wrong. You went with the Boston instead of Kufa. It's not the end of the world. Because it's like, it's something that you created with the human mind. It's a bit like math, right? Like, if you know integration, you know differentiation. It's actually the same. It's a bit of hard work, but you can get there, right? Whereas hadith, you can't get there through the mind, right? And Arabic language you can't get through the mind, right? So that's for me, just speaking personally, like why I consider like this is very important, like reading Arabic poetry and these kind of things, like it's not a logical discussion. It is like you have to be exposed to it, and there's no other way. Hadith, the same thing. Now with fiqh, I take back something that I just said. I said, oh, you can work it out. In principle, you can work it out, but it's actually harder than that. So that's one of the benefits of fiqh is like I actually couldn't do what you just did. Like I understand what you just did, and I guess I could do half of what you just did, but I can't do all of what you've just done. No. So in fiqh, like when you just study, like if you studied Mukhtasar Khalil, you're like, wow, right? The masail, right? The tafri'at, right? The exception to the rule, the this, the that. Minhaj al-Talibin, the hidayah, right? They say that like the hidayah marghinani, like it's like a mu'jiza, right? So yes, you could do it, but no, you couldn't. It's somewhere kind of in between. So that's for me. These are these golden sciences, right? Hadith, Arabic language more than Arabic, sorry, Arabic literature more than Arabic language, right? And fiqh, because you know, and then also the benefit of fiqh, you know. Allahu a'lam. Mustalah, yes, the mustalah was right, but the right. This is true. right? And therefore it's not perfect and nor is it absolute. But what I'm trying to say is the hadith itself, you can't know the hadith itself through theory, nor the narrators themselves, nor the details of the narrators themselves, right? So it's almost like the difference between processing power and actual data. So you had an AI thing, and it doesn't have any data, and it doesn't have any sense. Like it can't smell, can't touch, whatever. Then all it has is processing power, which is really, really, really good, but it doesn't have any data. So what are you going to do if you don't have any data? Nothing, right? So if you think about like poetry, Arabic language, the actual language itself, that is actual data, right? The hadith is actual data, right? Fiqh is processed data, right? So some of that processing you can do yourself. Some of it you can't really. It's kind of difficult, right? So for me, I'm just speaking as Farid Dingle. Again, many other people totally disagree with me. They find value in other things. That's totally fine. But like kalam is cheap in my opinion because it's not that complex. Or if it's complex, yeah, I could just work it out if I just sat and thought about it long enough, right? Because it's made by us. It's our analysis of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Logic, right? This is again Suyuti's position on it. It's like if you're intelligent, you don't need it. And if you're not intelligent, you won't understand it, right? And so Imam Suyuti, Suyuti makes the point, he's like somebody who, he said that anybody who's done ishtighal with the ma'qulat, you always see them the da'if in the naqliyat because life is short and takes time to do these things. Allahu a'lam. Does that make sense, Asim? Right. So I say that with logic. People say logic is important. Logic is important. If I were a 14-year-old in madrasa, I would study logic. Otherwise, I don't have time for logic. It's like, yeah, okay, they've studied a text in logic, so whatever. It's not important to me at all. Nahu as well. It's like I teach it in Bab, the Turath. There we go. But it's not particularly important to me. I teach it so that I don't mess things up for people, if that makes sense. Whereas like for me, if I pick up here's the Diwan of Al-A'sha and I don't understand what's going on, that means you don't understand things, right? If you pick up the Diwan of Al-A'sha and you're like, yes, I understand what's going on. You pick up Abu Dawud, you say, I can obviously see what he's doing, right? You know these people, you know those things, right? You're familiar with what's going on. You understand the language, you understand the narrators, you understand that this person's a well-known weak person. He's just showing you that this, etc. When you got that means you know things, right? So, again, just a side point, many people they talk about things based on their perspective, right? So for me, my Nahu is a level, I'm not a specialist in Nahu at all, and I don't even research Nahu, I just teach it. But it's like I understand it and pick up a book of tafsir, I understand the discussion, I can understand why you would object to it, and I've seen errors and etc. Some people who are not on that level, you should be on that level, right? So again, I don't mean to, somebody who's like, no, I'm struggling in my Nahu, like, well, you need to get it down because it is important, right? So sometimes you will hear your teachers, right, saying things, downplaying something when it's actually really important. That's because they already have it, right? Like fiqh isn't so important if you have it, right? But if you don't have it at all, right, then fiqh is really important. Right? You have to know these basic things, and that makes sense. So anyway, go on some tangents. Inshallah, we'll continue with Abdullah Mubarak, inshallah. Next week, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam.